Amy Rodriguez stood frozen in her kitchen doorway staring at the champagne bottle chilling in her refrigerator. The same bottle she'd bought to celebrate her 10th wedding anniversary next week. The same bottle her husband Marcus had suggested they save for something really special. Now she understood what he meant by special. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The text message on her phone screen glowed like a neon sign of betrayal. Can't wait for tonight, baby. Amy's working late again, so we have the whole evening. Wear that red dress I bought you. Nem. The message wasn't meant for her. It was meant for Claire Thompson, her best friend since college, her maid of honor, the woman who'd held Amy's hand through her mother's funeral and celebrated every milestone in her life. The woman who apparently had been balloting some very different milestones with Amy's husband. Amy's hands trembled as she set down her grocery bags, the ingredients for Marcus's favorite dinner spilling across the granite countertop they'd saved 3 years to afford. Her wedding ring caught the afternoon light streaming through the kitchen window, the same ring Marcus had placed on her finger with tears in his eyes, promising her forever. Forever had apparently expired somewhere between their last anniversary and today. Amy's discovery hadn't come as a lightning bolt. It had crept in like fog, subtle and gradual until suddenly she couldn't see clearly anymore. 3 months ago, Marcus had started working later, taking mysterious phone calls that required him to step outside, and developing a sudden interest in fitness that involved new workout clothes and cologne. Claire had become equally elusive, canceling their weekly coffee dates, avoiding eye contact during their kids' soccer games, and developing an odd habit of leaving the room whenever Amy mentioned Marcus. The pieces had been scattered across her life like breadcrumbs, but Amy had convinced herself she was being paranoid. Marriage required trust, didn't it? Good friends deserved the benefit of the doubt. She'd pushed down her suspicions, made excuses for the late nights and strange behavior, and tried to focus on her own busy life managing social media campaigns for a growing marketing firm in downtown Riverside Heights. But paranoia, Amy was learning, sometimes wore the mask of intuition. The text message had arrived because Marcus had grabbed the wrong phone from their shared charging station. In the chaos of their morning routine, with 15-year-old Tyler rushing to catch his ride to summer basketball camp, and Amy juggling conference calls with clients on the East Coast, Marcus had accidentally taken her phone and left his behind. Amy had discovered the mix-up when she'd tried to order lunch and found Marcus's phone buzzing with notifications. She'd intended to simply switch them back when she got home, but Claire's name had appeared on the screen with a message that made Amy's blood freeze. Missing you already. Last night was incredible. Can't believe Amy suspects nothing. The phone had slipped from Amy's hands, clattering against the kitchen tiles as the full weight of the betrayal crashed over her. Not just some random affair with a stranger she could maybe, possibly, eventually forgive. Claire, her closest friend. The woman who knew every secret, every fear, every dream Amy had ever shared. Amy sank into the kitchen chair where she'd eaten breakfast that morning with Marcus, where he'd kissed her goodbye and told her he loved her, where he'd made plans for their anniversary dinner at the Italian restaurant where they'd had their first date. The same chair where Claire had sat just 2 weeks ago, helping Amy plan a surprise birthday party for Marcus, nodding sympathetically when Amy worried she wasn't exciting enough to keep her husband interested. The irony tasted like bile in her throat. Amy forced herself to scroll through more messages, each one a dagger to her heart, photos of hotel rooms, dinner receipts from restaurants Amy had never been to, plans for weekend getaways that Marcus had told her were work conferences. The conversation history stretched back 4 months, filled with intimate messages that used the pet names Marcus had once reserved for Amy, discussed the future in ways that made it clear this wasn't a casual fling. They were planning a life together, a life that apparently didn't include Amy. One message made her stomach lurch. Amy's been so stressed with work lately. I almost feel bad. Almost. But she'll be better off without him in the long run. You know how Marcus gets when he's bored. Claire knew how Marcus got when he was bored, because Amy had confided in her about their marriage troubles, about Marcus's restlessness, his complaints that their life had become routine, his wandering eye that Amy had noticed but chosen to ignore. Claire had listened to every worry, offered advice and held Amy while she cried about feeling inadequate. All while sleeping with her husband, Amy's phone rang, startling her from her spiral of discovery. Marcus's name appeared on the screen and for a moment she considered not answering, but something inside her, some instinct she didn't fully understand yet, made her pick up. "Hey babe." Marcus's voice was casual, warm even. "I think we grabbed each other's phones this morning. I'm missing mine." "Oh," Amy managed, her voice surprisingly steady. "Yes, I noticed. I have yours here." "Great. I'll swing by and grab it after work." "Don't look at my messages though," he added with a laugh that now sounded sinister to Amy's ears. "I might have some surprise anniversary plans in there." "Surprise anniversary plans?" Amy almost laughed at the absurdity. "Of course not. I would never invade your privacy. That's my girl. Love you." The line went dead, and Amy stared at the phone in her hand. "That's my girl." The same phrase he'd used in his messages to Claire. Nothing was even sacred to him. Not even their private language of love. Amy set the phone on the counter and walked to the kitchen window, looking out at the suburban street where she'd thought she was building a life. Her neighbor Helen Martinez was tending to her rose garden next door, the same garden Amy had admired every morning for the past 5 years. Helen was a widow in her 70s, a retired family court judge, who'd always been kind but kept to herself. As if sensing Amy's gaze, Helen looked up and waved. There was something in the older woman's expression, a knowing look that made Amy wonder if Helen had noticed things Amy had missed. In a neighborhood where everyone knew everyone else's business, it seemed impossible that a 4-month affair could go completely unnoticed. Amy waved back and Helen set down her pruning shears, walking to the fence that separated their yard. "You look troubled, dear," Helen said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to reading people. "Is everything all right?" Amy opened her mouth to give the standard response, the polite deflection that everything was fine. But something about Helen's direct gaze, the absence of judgment in her weathered face, made the truth spill out instead. "I think my husband is having an affair." Helen nodded slowly, as if this wasn't surprising news. "With the blonde woman who's been visiting your house when you're at work." The words hit Amy like a physical blow. "You've seen her, Claire Thompson, isn't it? From 3 streets over." Helen's voice was gentle but precise. "She's been coming by quite regularly, Tuesdays and Thursdays, usually around noon. Sometimes she stays for hours." Amy gripped the fence between them, her knuckles white. "How long?" "A few months now." I debated whether to say something, but Helen trailed off, studying Amy's face. "You suspected already." It wasn't a question, and Amy found herself nodding. "I found messages on his phone. We accidentally switched this morning." Helen glanced around the quiet street, then back at Amy. "Would you like to come over for tea?" This isn't a conversation for the fence line. 20 minutes later, Amy sat in Helen's immaculate living room, surrounded by law books and family photos, holding a delicate china teacup that rattled slightly against its saucer from her trembling hand. Helen had listened without interruption as Amy poured out the story of the messages, the months of strange behavior, the devastating realization that her best friend had been systematically betraying her trust. "The question now," Helen said, when Amy finished, "is what you plan to do about it." "I don't know," Amy admitted. "Confront them? File for divorce? I feel so stupid for not seeing it sooner." Helen leaned forward, her sharp blue eyes fixed on Amy with an intensity that reminded Amy of the judge Helen had once been. "You're not stupid. You're There's a difference, though I understand why it doesn't feel that way right now. I keep thinking about all the times Claire comforted me when I worried about our marriage, all the advice she gave me about being more understanding, more patient with Marcus's mood. She was sabotaging us while pretending to help." "Yes," Helen said simply, "that's exactly what she was doing. The question is whether you want to simply end this situation, or whether you want justice." The word hung in the air between them, loaded with possibility. "What do you mean?" Helen stood and walked to an antique secretary desk, returning with a leather portfolio. "I spent 30 years presiding over family court cases, divorce proceedings, custody battles, asset disputes. I've seen every kind of betrayal you can imagine, and I've learned that how you handle the discovery often determines how the rest of your life unfolds. She opened the portfolio, revealing a collection of documents and photographs. Your husband and your friend think they're clever, that they're getting away with something. They've made you complicit in your own deception by using your trust against you. But they've also made mistakes. Amy looked at the documents Helen was arranging on the coffee table. Legal forms, contact information for private investigators, financial disclosure sheets. I retired from the bench 5 years ago, Helen continued, but I maintain relationships with some of the best family law attorneys in the state. More importantly, I know how to document evidence properly, how to protect assets, and how to ensure that when the truth comes out, it comes out in a way that serves justice, rather than just ending the situation. You want to help me? Helen's smile was sharp as a blade. Dear, I've been watching this unfold in my neighborhood for months, and I've been hoping you'd figure it out. Claire Thompson's husband Kevin works with my nephew at the county planning office. He's a good man who has no idea his wife is destroying 2 families. Marcus has been parking his truck 2 blocks away and walking to your house through the park to avoid being seen by other neighbors. They think they're being so careful. Amy stared at Helen, processing the implications. You've been watching them. I've been documenting dates, times, duration of visits. I have photographs of Claire entering and leaving your house. I know which hotels they've used for their getaways, because Claire pays for them with a credit card linked to the joint account she shares with Kevin. The methodical nature of Helen's surveillance was both impressive and slightly terrifying. Why would you do all that? Because I know what it's like to have your life destroyed by someone you trust, Helen said quietly. My late husband had an affair with my sister. I found out 3 months before he died in a car accident. I never got the chance for justice, never got the satisfaction of seeing him face the consequences of his choices. I've regretted that for 20 years. Helen reached across the table and took Amy's hand in hers, and Amy was surprised by the strength in the older woman's grip. They think they're so smart, Amy. They think they've planned this perfectly, that they can discard you and Kevin when it's convenient and start fresh with no consequence. But they've made one crucial mistake. What's that? They underestimated you, and they've never met me. Amy felt something shift inside her chest, a hardening of resolve she didn't know she possessed. For 4 months she'd been the victim in this story, the fool being played by the 2 people she trusted most. But sitting in Helen's living room, surrounded by evidence of their deception and looking into the eyes of someone who understood betrayal intimately, Amy realized she had a choice. She could be the victim, or she could be the victor. What would justice look like? Amy asked, her voice steadier than it had been all day. Helen's smile was both kind and predatory. It would look like them facing the full consequences of their action. Marcus losing everything he's taken for granted. Claire explaining to her husband and children why she destroyed 2 families for a man who will inevitably grow bored with her too. It would look like you controlling the narrative instead of being controlled by it. Amy thought about the anniversary dinner she'd been planning, the vacation days she'd saved for their 10th anniversary trip to Hawaii, the retirement account she'd been building for their future together. She thought about Tyler, who adored his father and had no idea his family was built on lies. She thought about Kevin Thompson, coaching Little League with Marcus, planning neighborhood barbecues, living in the same oblivious trust that had defined Amy's life until 3 hours ago. How long would we have to plan this? They think you're clueless, Helen replied. That gives us all the time we need. But first, you need to decide if you're ready to stop being their victim and start being their reckoning. Amy looked down at her wedding ring, at the symbol of promises that had been broken before the ink was dry on their marriage certificate. Then she looked at Helen, this unexpected ally who offered not just sympathy but strategy. Yes, Amy said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. I'm ready. Helen nodded approvingly. Then let's discuss how to make them wish they'd never heard your name. Outside, the afternoon sun cast long shadows across Riverside Heights, illuminating a neighborhood where appearances were everything, and secrets thrived in the spaces between perfectly manicured lawns. But inside Helen Martinez's living room, 2 women who had been underestimated were beginning to plan something that would shatter those carefully maintained facades forever. Amy Rodriguez was about to discover that sometimes the best revenge wasn't just getting even, sometimes it was getting everything. The next morning arrived with the cruel normalcy that follows life-altering discoveries. Amy woke to the sound of Marcus showering, the same routine that had marked their mornings for a decade. She lay still, listening to him humming a song she didn't recognize, and wondered how many other mornings he'd hummed melodies inspired by another woman. Marcus emerged from the bathroom with a towel around his waist, his hair damp, and his skin smelling of the expensive body wash Amy had bought him for his birthday, the birthday where Claire had helped her plan the surprise party, suggesting the specific cologne that Amy now realized matched what Claire preferred on her lovers. "Morning, beautiful," Marcus said, leaning down to kiss her forehead. The gesture that had once made her feel cherished now felt like a performance, a routine maintenance of his cover story. Amy managed to smile, though it felt like her face might crack from the effort. "Good morning, coffee's ready downstairs, you're the best." Marcus pulled on his work clothes, the same jeans and company polo shirt he'd worn yesterday when he'd accidentally taken her phone. "I've got that job site inspection in Bakersfield today, so I'll be home late again. Don't wait up." Another lie, delivered with the casual confidence of someone who'd never been caught. Amy nodded, mentally noting that Helen would want to know about this supposed trip. If Marcus was lying about Bakersfield, he was probably planning to spend the day with Claire while Amy was at work. "Will you be home for dinner tomorrow?" Amy asked, testing him. "Tyler has that awards ceremony at school." Marcus paused in tying his boots, and Amy caught a flicker of something across his face. Guilt, annoyance, right? "Tyler's thing. I'll try to make it, but this Bakersfield project is pretty demanding." Tyler's academic achievement ceremony, the one Amy had mentioned to Marcus 6 times over the past month, the one he'd promised to attend. Now it was just Tyler's thing, an inconvenience that might interfere with his affair schedule. After Marcus left, Amy sat at her kitchen table with her laptop, ostensibly preparing for her morning client calls, but actually researching everything Helen had mentioned the night before. Family law in California, asset protection strategies, private investigation services. The rabbit hole of information was both overwhelming and empowering. Her phone buzzed with a text from Claire. "Coffee this morning. I know we keep missing each other, and I miss my girl time." Amy stared at the message, marveling at Claire's audacity. "Miss my girl time," as if Claire hadn't been systematically destroying Amy's life while maintaining the facade of friendship, as if the reason they kept missing each other wasn't because Claire was too busy sleeping with Amy's husband. Instead of the angry response that burned in her throat, Amy typed back, "Would love to. The daily grind at 10. The response came immediately, "Perfect. Can't wait to catch up." Amy set the phone aside and called her assistant at the marketing firm. "Jennifer, I need to shift my morning meetings to this afternoon. Something's come up." An hour later, Amy sat in the daily grind, the coffee shop where she and Claire had shared countless conversations over the years. She'd chosen a table near the window, knowing Helen would be able to see them from her position across the street in the vintage bookstore that offered a perfect surveillance point. Claire arrived 15 minutes late, as always, rushing through the door with her designer handbag and apologetic smile. She looked radiant in a way that made Amy's stomach turn, glowing with the satisfaction of a woman living a secret life. "Amy, you look tired, honey. Are you sleeping okay?" The concern in Claire's voice was masterful, perfectly calibrated to seem caring while subtly undermining Amy's confidence. Amy had fallen for this routine countless times, accepting Claire's observations about her appearance, her marriage, her life as the caring insights of a devoted friend. "Just work stress," Amy replied, forcing herself to hug Claire when she approached the table. "You know how demanding clients can be." "Oh, I do, but you can't let work consume you. You need to make time for fun, for yourself. When's the last time you and Marcus did something spontaneous?" Amy nearly choked on her coffee. Claire was actually sitting there advising Amy about her relationship with Marcus while sleeping with him behind her back. The shamelessness was breathtaking. "Marcus has been working so much lately," Amy said, watching Claire's face carefully. "All these out-of-town projects, I barely see him." "Men and their work," Claire said, shaking her head sympathetically. "Kevin's the same way. Sometimes I think they use work as an excuse to avoid dealing with relationship issues." The hypocrisy was staggering. Claire was complaining about Kevin, her devoted husband who had no idea his wife was betraying him, while simultaneously destroying Amy's marriage. Amy wondered if Claire actually believed her own performance or if she was simply that skilled at compartmentalization. Speaking of Kevin, how are things with you two? Amy asked, genuine curiosity mixing with her investigation. Claire's expression shifted slightly, a micro-expression of annoyance that disappeared so quickly Amy almost missed it. Fine, same as always. He's so predictable, you know. Work, home, television, bed. Sometimes I wonder what it would be like to be with someone more adventurous. Amy felt her hands clench under the table. Claire was sitting there, describing her husband as boring, while she carried on an affair, acting as if her betrayal was somehow Kevin's fault for being stable and reliable. Adventure is overrated, Amy said carefully. Stability has its own appeal, does it though? Claire leaned forward, her voice taking on the intimate tone she used when dispensing what she considered wisdom. I mean, don't you ever feel like life is passing you by, like you're settling for comfortable instead of passionate? The conversation was surreal. Claire was essentially trying to convince Amy that her own marriage was inadequate while secretly sleeping with Amy's husband. It was manipulation disguised as friendship, destruction wrapped in the language of caring advice. I think passion can be cultivated in long-term relationships, Amy replied, testing how far Claire would push. It just requires both people to be committed to nurturing it. Claire's laugh had an edge to it. Amy, you're so optimistic, but sometimes people grow apart. Sometimes they realize they want different things. It's not anyone's fault, it just happens. Amy recognized the script now. Claire was laying the groundwork for Amy's eventual heartbreak, priming her to accept the end of her marriage as a natural, inevitable outcome rather than the result of deliberate betrayal. When Marcus eventually left, Claire would be there to comfort Amy with these very same words, helping her process the loss while secretly celebrating her victory. I suppose, Amy said, playing along, though I'd hope that if Marcus ever felt that way, he'd talk to me about it rather than.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Withdrawing. Men aren't great at communication, Claire said, and Amy caught something in her tone, a smugness that suggested Claire knew exactly how Marcus communicated when he was motivated to do so. Sometimes, they don't even realize what they're feeling until it's too late to fix things. They talked for another hour, Claire skillfully steering the conversation toward Amy's insecurities and relationship doubts while positioning herself as the supportive friend, helping Amy see reality. It was a masterclass in psychological manipulation, and Amy marveled at how completely she'd fallen for it in the past. When Claire excused herself to use the restroom, Amy quickly texted Helen. She's trying to convince me my marriage is naturally falling apart, setting me up to accept the inevitable. Helen's response was immediate. Classic strategy. She needs you to blame yourself so she doesn't look like the villain. How are you holding up? Angry but focused, Amy typed back, deleting the message just as Claire returned to the table. Sorry about that, Claire said, settling back into her chair. So, what are you and Marcus doing for your anniversary next week? Anything special planned? The question hit Amy like a slap. Their anniversary, which Marcus had claimed to have special plans for, which Claire obviously knew about because she was part of those plans. Amy wondered if they'd chosen their anniversary weekend, deliberately, as some kind of twisted celebration of their deception. We haven't finalized anything yet, Amy said, forcing her voice to remain level. Marcus mentioned wanting to do something memorable. You should. 10 years is a big milestone. You deserve something really special. Claire's enthusiasm seemed genuine, which made it even more disturbing. She was encouraging Amy to celebrate an anniversary that she was actively sabotaging. After Claire left, kissing Amy goodbye and promising to call later in the week, Amy sat alone in the coffee shop, processing the conversation. Helen appeared at her table within minutes, sliding into Claire's vacated chair with the efficiency of someone accustomed to strategic positioning. How do you feel? Helen asked without preamble. Like I was talking to a stranger, Amy replied honestly. I keep thinking about all the time she's given me that exact same advice, Made me doubt my marriage while she was undermining it. How did I not see this? Because you're not a sociopath, Helen said bluntly. Normal people don't assume their closest friends are capable of this level of calculated betrayal. Claire is skilled at this because she's done it before. Amy looked up sharply. What do you mean? Helen pulled out her phone and showed Amy a series of screenshots. I did some research last night. Claire Thompson, before she married Kevin, was Claire Morrison. She had an affair with her best friend's husband in Phoenix 5 years ago. The marriage ended, the friendship was destroyed, and Claire moved here shortly after to start fresh. The revelation hit Amy like a physical blow. This wasn't a moment of weakness or a situation that had spiraled out of control. Claire was a predator who targeted married men by befriending their wives first. Amy hadn't been unlucky. She'd been hunting the best friend in Phoenix, Amy said slowly. What happened to her? Divorced, lost half her assets, struggled financially while her ex-husband and Claire lived in the house she'd helped buy. The friend Linda started a blog about emotional abuse and betrayal. Some of her posts described Claire's methods in detail. Helen showed Amy excerpts from the blog, and Amy felt sick reading the familiar pattern. The same advice about marriage requiring adventure, the same subtle undermining of confidence, the same positioning as the supportive friend while systematically destroying the relationship from within. Linda writes about feeling crazy during the affair. Helen continued, doubting her own perceptions, because her best friend kept telling her she was being paranoid while simultaneously feeding information about the marriage to her husband. Amy thought about all the conversations she'd had with Claire about Marcus's moods, his complaints, his restless energy, information that Claire had obviously shared with Marcus, helping him justify his affair while making Amy feel inadequate for not understanding his needs. So this is a pattern for her, Amy said, pieces clicking into place. She befriends married women, studies their relationships, identifies weaknesses, then exploits them. Exactly. And she's very good at it, because she genuinely becomes friends with her targets first. The betrayal is more devastating because the emotional connection is real even if her motives aren't. Amy stared out the coffee shop window at the street, where she'd built what she'd thought was a life. Kevin doesn't know, does he? About Phoenix. No. Claire told him she moved here for work opportunities. He thinks she's never been married before. So she's destroying his life too, just more slowly. Helen nodded grimly. Kevin Thompson is a good man who thinks he married his dream woman. He has no idea he's married to someone who views relationships as strategic games to be won. Amy felt a surge of protective anger for Kevin, this man she barely knew who was being deceived as completely as she was. We have to tell him. We will, Helen assured her. But timing matters. If we expose Claire too early, she'll find a way to manipulate the situation. She'll convince Kevin that we're jealous or unstable, and she'll accelerate her timeline with Marcus. We need to be strategic. What do you suggest? Helen leaned forward, her expression taking on the focused intensity. Amy was beginning to recognize. We let them think they're winning. We give them enough rope to hang themselves. Claire thinks she's manipulating you into accepting your marriage's failure, so we let her believe that's working. Meanwhile, we document everything and prepare for the moment when we can expose them completely. How long do we wait? Until your anniversary weekend, Helen said with a thin smile. Let them have their celebration. Let them think they've gotten away with it. Then we show them what justice looks like. Amy spent the rest of the week living in a surreal double life. At work, she managed client campaigns and attended strategy meetings as if her personal life wasn't imploding. At home, she cooked dinner for Marcus and Tyler, helped with homework, and maintained the facade of domestic normalcy, while documenting every lie her husband told. Marcus's stories became increasingly elaborate. The Bakersfield project had expanded into a week-long job requiring daily travel. His supervisor needed him to scout potential sites in 3 different counties. The client was demanding, the timeline was tight, and Marcus was the only one qualified to handle the complexity. Amy nodded sympathetically, while mentally noting that Marcus's supposed supervisor had posted photos on social media of his family vacation in San Diego during the exact days Marcus claimed to be working with him. Claire, meanwhile, ramped up her campaign of support and advice. She called twice during the week, each conversation carefully designed to make Amy question her marriage, while positioning Claire as the understanding friend, helping her navigate a difficult situation. "Are you sure everything's okay with you and Marcus?" "Just tired," Amy replied, sticking to the script Helen had helped her develop. "Work has been demanding, and Marcus is traveling so much. I feel like we're ships passing in the night." "That's so hard," Claire said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "You know, distance like that can really strain a marriage. Sometimes couples drift apart without even realizing it's happening." Amy bit her tongue to keep from screaming. Claire was describing the very distance she was actively creating while pretending to be concerned about its effects. "I keep hoping things will get back to normal after this big project ends," Amy said, testing how Claire would respond to optimism. "Oh honey," Claire's voice took on the gentle tone reserved for delivering bad news. "Sometimes normal isn't enough anymore, sometimes people change, and what worked before doesn't work anymore. It's nobody's fault. It just happened." There it was again, the script designed to make Amy accept defeat as inevitable rather than recognizing it as sabotage. Amy wondered how many conversations like this Claire had had with Linda in Phoenix, slowly poisoning her confidence while stealing her husband. "I suppose you're right," Amy said, playing the role of the slowly defeated wife. "Maybe I've been holding on to something that isn't there anymore. It's so hard to let go," Claire agreed, and Amy could practically hear the satisfaction in her voice. "But sometimes holding on hurts more than letting go. You deserve to be happy, Amy. You deserve someone who chooses you every day." The irony was breathtaking. Claire was giving Amy relationship advice, while systematically destroying her relationship, speaking about deserving happiness while actively sabotaging it, talking about being chosen while stealing the person who was supposed to choose Amy. Thursday evening brought a new development. Amy was working late at her home office when she heard Tyler's voice from the kitchen, talking to Marcus, who had supposedly been in Bakersfield all day. "Dad, Claire called looking for you earlier. She said she had some question about the neighborhood barbecue committee." Amy froze at her desk. Claire had called the house looking for Marcus while Marcus was supposedly out of town on business. Either she was incredibly stupid, or she was getting careless, because she thought Amy was too oblivious to notice. "Oh," Marcus's voice was carefully casual. "Did she say what she needed?" "Something about coordinating with the other families. She seemed kind of anxious about it. Mom was still at work, so I told her you'd call her back." "Right. The barbecue thing. I forgot about that. I'll give her a call later." Amy crept to the top of the stairs, listening to her husband lie to their son about why another woman was calling for him. Tyler, innocent and trusting, had no idea he was facilitating his father's affair by delivering messages. That night, after Tyler went to bed, Amy confronted Marcus about the call. "Tyler mentioned Claire called looking for you today," she said casually while they watched television. "Something about the barbecue committee." Marcus didn't even blink. "Oh right. She's organizing the food assignment. Wanted to make sure we weren't double booking the grills or something." Another lie, delivered with practiced ease. Amy nodded, as if this made perfect sense, while internally marveling at how naturally deception came to him now. "It's nice that she's so organized," Amy said, "though I'm surprised she called during the day when you were supposed to be in Bakersfield." For just a moment, Marcus hesitated. "She probably forgot about my travel schedule. You know how scattered Claire can be." Scattered was not a word anyone would use to describe Claire Thompson, but Amy let it pass. She was learning that catching Marcus in lies was less important than documenting them. Helen had been right about giving them rope to hang themselves. Friday morning brought the most surreal conversation yet. Amy was getting dressed for work when Marcus approached her with an expression of manufactured concern. "Hey, I've been thinking," he said, sitting on the edge of their bed. "You've seemed really stressed lately. Maybe you should talk to someone. Talk to someone, like a counselor or therapist. I'm worried about you, Amy. You seem anxious, distracted. I think this job might be too much for you." Amy stared at her husband in disbelief. He was suggesting she needed therapy for stress that he was causing through his affair, while simultaneously implying that her successful career was somehow problematic. "I'm fine, Marcus, just tired. Are you though?" His voice took on the concerned tone that had once made her feel cared for. "You've been different lately, distant. I'm wondering if maybe you're having some kind of emotional breakdown." The gaslighting was breathtaking in its audacity. Marcus was having an affair, lying constantly, and systematically destroying their marriage, but he was suggesting that Amy's stress response to his behavior indicated she needed professional help. "I'll think about it," Amy said, not trusting herself to say more. "Good. I care about you, Amy. I want you to be happy and healthy. Maybe some time to focus on yourself would be good for both of us." Amy recognized the subtext. Marcus was laying groundwork for a separation, framing it as concern for her mental health rather than his desire to be with Claire openly. When he eventually asked for space or a trial separation, he'd point to this conversation as evidence that he'd tried to help her but she'd been too unstable to accept it. After Marcus left for his fake job in Bakersfield, Amy called Helen. "He's trying to make me think I'm crazy," Amy said without preamble. "Gaslighting," Helen confirmed. "Classic abuser tactic. Make the victim question their own reality so they're easier to control and discard." "What specifically did he say?" Amy recounted the conversation, and Helen's silence on the other end spoke volumes. Helen said finally, "This is worse than an affair. This is psychological abuse. He's not just cheating, he's trying to make you doubt your own sanity, so you'll blame yourself when he leaves. I feel like I'm living in an alternate reality, where everything I thought was real is fake." "That's exactly what he wants you to feel. But you're not crazy, Amy. You're being systematically manipulated by someone who's very skilled at it. The question is, are you ready to stop being his victim?" Amy looked around the bedroom she'd shared with Marcus for 10 years, at the photos of their life together that now felt like evidence of an elaborate con game. On her dresser sat the anniversary gift she'd bought him weeks ago, a watch engraved with the date of their wedding, and the words, "Forever yours." Forever yours. The promise felt like mockery now. "Yes," Amy said, her voice steadier than it had been in weeks. "I'm ready to stop being anyone's victim." "Good, because tomorrow we begin phase 2 of our plan. It's time to start gathering the kind of evidence that will destroy them both." Amy hung up the phone and looked at herself in the bedroom mirror. The woman staring back at her looked tired, stressed and worn down exactly as Marcus had described, but there was something else in her reflection now, something that hadn't been there a week ago. There was steel in her eye. Marcus and Claire thought they were playing a game where only they knew the rules. They thought Amy was a pawn to be moved around the board until she could be discarded, but they had made one crucial mistake in their calculation. They had underestimated exactly how far Amy was willing to go to protect herself and the other innocent people in their destructive path, and they had never met Helen Martinez, who understood better than anyone how to turn the hunters into the hunt. The weekend arrived with Marcus announcing another last-minute business trip, this one requiring him to leave Saturday morning and return Sunday evening. Amy expressed disappointment, while secretly feeling grateful for the uninterrupted time to execute the next phase of their plan. Helen arrived at Amy's house an hour after Marcus left, carrying a small suitcase that contained what she described as professional surveillance equipment, acquired through her connections in law enforcement. "Today we get the evidence that will end this," Helen said, setting up a laptop on Amy's kitchen table. "But first we need to talk about what you're prepared to see." Amy knew what Helen meant. Watching her husband with another woman, even through surveillance footage, would be devastating in ways that text messages couldn't fully prepare her for. "I need to see it," Amy said firmly. "I need to know exactly who I'm married to." Helen nodded approvingly. "Good. Because when this is over you'll never question your decision to leave him." They spent the morning setting up tracking devices on Marcus's truck, courtesy of Helen's nephew who worked in private security. By afternoon they knew exactly where Marcus and Claire were spending their romantic weekend, the Riverside Resort, an upscale hotel, 20 minutes outside town where Amy and Marcus had celebrated their 5th anniversary. "The audacity," Helen muttered, watching the location tracker on her laptop. "He's taking her to your anniversary spot," Amy felt a flash of rage so pure it surprised her with its intensity. Not only was Marcus betraying their marriage, he was desecrating their memories, turning places that held meaning for Amy into locations for his affair. I want to see them, Amy said. Helen studied her carefully. Are you sure? Once you see certain images, you can never unsee them. I'm sure. They drove to the Riverside Resort in Helen's car, parking in a position that offered a clear view of the pool area where Amy's tracking showed Marcus and Claire were spending their afternoon. Helen handed Amy a pair of high-powered binoculars and a camera with a telephoto lens. Document everything, Helen instructed. Faces, locations, intimate behavior. We need evidence that can't be explained away as innocent friendship. Through the binoculars, Amy watched her husband and her best friend living the life they'd stolen from her. Marcus was more attentive to Claire than he'd been to Amy in years, constantly touching her, bringing her drinks, laughing at everything she said. Claire, meanwhile, was playing the role of the adoring girlfriend, hanging on his every word as if he was the most fascinating man she'd ever met. She's performing, Amy observed, watching Claire's exaggerated responses to Marcus's conversation. Of course she is, Helen replied. She's done this before. She knows exactly how to make a man feel like the center of the universe, especially a man who's feeling underappreciated at home. Amy watched Marcus kiss Claire by the pool, the same tender kiss he'd given Amy thousands of times during their marriage. But there was something different about his body language with Claire, a possessiveness that Amy realized had been missing from their relationship for months. He's in love with her, Amy said, the words tasting bitter. He thinks he is, Helen corrected. He's in love with how she makes him feel about himself. There's a difference. They photographed Marcus and Claire for 2 hours, capturing intimate moments that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. When the couple retired to their room, Amy and Helen retreated to a nearby cafe to review the evidence. This is enough to destroy both their marriages, Helen said, scrolling through the digital photos. But I want to give you something more. What do you mean? Helen's smile was predatory. I want to give you the satisfaction of watching them realize they've lost everything. Not just their marriages, but their reputations, their financial security, their carefully constructed lives. How? By letting them think they've won first. Next weekend is your anniversary. Let Marcus think he's successfully convinced you that your marriage is falling apart naturally. Let Claire think her manipulation has worked. Let them celebrate their victory. Helen leaned forward, her eyes bright with strategic intensity. Then we'll show them what real consequences look like. Amy looked at the photos of her husband with another woman, images that would have destroyed her a week ago but now only strengthened her resolve. She thought about Kevin Thompson, still believing he was married to a faithful wife. She thought about Tyler, who deserved to know the truth about his father. She thought about Linda in Phoenix, whose life had been destroyed by Claire's calculated betrayal. What did you have in mind? Amy asked. Helen's smile was sharp as a blade. Anniversary party they'll never forget. Over the next week, Amy played her role perfectly. She became increasingly withdrawn and melancholy, dropping hints to both Marcus and Claire that she was beginning to accept the end of her marriage. When Marcus suggested they postpone their anniversary dinner because work was too demanding, Amy agreed with sad resignation rather than anger. Maybe you're right, she told him. Maybe we're just going through the motions at this point. Marcus's relief was visible, confirming that he'd been dreading having to perform marital happiness for an entire evening when his heart was elsewhere. Claire, meanwhile, intensified her campaign of support and advice, positioning herself as the friend helping Amy process her failing marriage. I've been thinking about what you said, Amy told Claire during their final coffee meeting, about holding onto something that isn't there anymore. Maybe you're right, maybe it's time to let go. Oh honey, Claire said, her voice dripping with false sympathy while her eyes shone with satisfaction. I know this is hard, but sometimes accepting reality is the first step toward healing. Amy nodded sadly, playing the part of the defeated wife while internally counting down the hours until Claire's world imploded. The anniversary weekend arrived with Marcus announcing yet another business trip, this one requiring him to leave Friday evening and return Monday morning. Amy wished him a safe trip, kissed him goodbye, and watched him drive away to spend their anniversary weekend with the woman who was destroying their marriage. Then she picked up the phone and began making calls. "Tyler, honey, I need you to stay at your cousin's house this weekend. Something's come up." "Kevin, this is Amy Rodriguez, Claire's friend. I was wondering if you could meet me for coffee tomorrow. There's something important I need to discuss with you." "Grace, it's Amy. Are you available for an emergency consultation this weekend?" "I need to file for divorce immediately." "Patricia, this is Helen Martinez. It's time to execute our plan." By Sunday morning, the trap was set. Kevin Thompson sat in Amy's living room, his face pale as he processed the evidence of his wife's systematic betrayal. Grace Bennett, the family law attorney Helen had recommended, had prepared divorce papers that would freeze Marcus's assets and ensure Amy's financial protection. Patricia Williams, the private investigator Helen had hired, had additional evidence of Claire's pattern of predatory behavior spanning multiple states. "I can't believe she's done this before," Kevin said, staring at the photos of his wife with Marcus. "She seemed so perfect when we met, so understanding about my previous divorce, so supportive." "That's her strategy," Amy explained gently. "She targets vulnerable people and becomes whatever they need her to be. Then she destroys them when someone better comes along." Kevin looked around Amy's living room, taking in the evidence of a life being systematically destroyed. "What happens now?" Amy exchanged a glance with Helen, who nodded encouragingly. "Now," Amy said, "we make sure they face the full consequences of their choices." At exactly 6 o'clock Sunday evening, as Marcus and Claire were checking out of their romantic weekend getaway, both their phones rang simultaneously. The calls gave from divorce attorneys, informing them that papers had been filed, assets had been frozen, and their spouses were prepared to make their affairs public if they didn't agree to specific terms. Amy listened to her phone ringing from across the room, knowing it was Marcus calling in panic, knowing that his carefully constructed double life was crashing down around him. She didn't answer. Instead, she poured herself a glass of wine and sat in her living room, surrounded by evidence of betrayal, feeling something she hadn't experienced in months. Peace. The hunters had become the hunted. The manipulators had been outmaneuvered. And Amy Rodriguez, who had started this story as a victim, was ending it as the victor. But the real justice was yet to come. Monday morning arrived with the kind of California sunshine that made betrayal seem impossible. Yet Amy woke knowing that today would reshape multiple lives forever. She had slept better than she had in months, despite everything that was about to unfold. There was something deeply satisfying about finally holding all the cards in a game where she'd been played for so long. Her phone showed 47 missed calls from Marcus, 32 from Claire, and a string of increasingly frantic text messages that painted a clear picture of their panic. Amy scrolled through them over her morning coffee, each message revealing more about their true characters than years of marriage and friendship ever had. Marcus's messages started with confusion. "Amy, what's going on? Some lawyer called me about divorce papers. This has to be a mistake." Then moved to bargaining. "Please call me back. We can work this out. Whatever you think happened, you're wrong. I love you." And finally devolved into threats. "You can't do this to me. Half of everything is mine. You'll regret this." Claire's messages followed a similar trajectory, though hers were more sophisticated in their manipulation. "Amy, honey, I don't understand what's happening. Kevin is saying horrible things about us. Please call me so we can clear this up," followed by attempts at guilt. "I'm your best friend. How could you believe these lies about me? After everything we've been through together," and ending with desperation, "Whatever Kevin told you, he's lying. He's been trying to turn you against me for months, because he's jealous of our friendship." Amy set her phone aside and walked to her kitchen window, where she could see Helen tending to her roses with the same methodical precision she brought to everything else. The older woman looked up and gave Amy a small nod, a gesture that somehow conveyed both support and satisfaction. The doorbell rang at exactly 9 o'clock. Amy opened it to find Marcus standing on their porch, looking haggard and desperate in a way she'd never seen before. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his clothes wrinkled from what had obviously been a sleepless night, and his eyes held a wild quality that made Amy glad Helen was watching from across the street. Amy, thank God you're here. We need to talk. Marcus pushed past her into the house without invitation, pacing the living room like a caged animal. This is insane. Divorce papers? Asset freezing. What the hell is going on? Amy closed the door and leaned against it, studying her husband with new eyes. Without the filter of love and trust, she could see him clearly for perhaps the first time. The charm that had once drawn her to him now looked calculated. The confidence she'd admired seemed more like arrogance. The passionate intensity that had made her feel special was revealed as the desperation of someone who needed constant validation. What's going on, Amy said calmly, is that I know about Claire. Marcus froze mid-pace, his face cycling through several expressions before settling on a mixture of guilt and defiance. No, what about Claire? The fact that he was still lying, even now, with divorce papers in his hands and his marriage exploding around him, told Amy everything she needed to know about who she'd really been married to. I know you've been having an affair with her for 4 months. I know you've been using our joint savings to pay for hotel rooms and romantic getaways. I know you've been lying about work trips while you were actually with her. I know she's been manipulating me, undermining our marriage while pretending to be my friend. Amy's voice remained steady, each word delivered with the precision of someone who had rehearsed this moment. Marcus's shoulders sagged as the weight of his exposure settled over him. For a moment, Amy almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Amy, I can explain. It's not what you think. It just happened. We didn't plan it. You've been so busy with work, so distant lately. I was lonely, and Claire was there. And it just, stop. Amy held up her hand, cutting off his practiced speech. Don't insult my intelligence with that script. I know this wasn't some spontaneous mistake. I know Claire has done this before, in Phoenix. I know she targeted our marriage deliberately, and you were happy to help her destroy it. Marcus's face went white. Phoenix? How do I know about Linda Morrison? About how Claire seduced her husband while pretending to be her best friend. About how she moved here to start over after destroying another family. Amy stepped closer to Marcus, watching him realize that his affair partner wasn't the woman he thought she was. Did you think you were special, Marcus? Did you think you were the great love of her life? The look of dawning horror on Marcus's face was almost satisfying enough to make up for months of lies. Almost. That's impossible. Claire told me she'd never been married before. She said I was her first real love. Amy laughed, a sound devoid of humor. Claire tells every man what he wants to hear, just like she told every woman what she wanted to hear. You're not special, Marcus. You're just convenient. Marcus sank into the couch they'd picked out together during their second year of marriage, his head in his hands. This can't be happening. We were going to be together. We were making plans. What plans? To move in together after you divorced me and she divorced Kat. To start fresh with the money you stole from both your families. Amy sat across from him, maintaining her composure despite the urge to scream. Did you think about Tyler at all during your planning? About what this would do to our son? Tyler will understand eventually. Kids are resilient, and you and I haven't been happy for years, Amy. You know that. The casual dismissal of their son's well-being, the rewriting of their marriage history to justify his betrayal, the complete absence of accountability. It was like looking at a stranger wearing her husband's face. We were happy until you decided we weren't, Amy said, until you chose to believe Claire's poison about our marriage being boring and routine. She fed you those lines because that's what she does. She identifies what men want to hear and tells them exactly that. Marcus looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and desperate. Maybe at first, but what we have now is real. I love her, Amy. I've never felt this way about anyone. You love how she makes you feel about yourself. There's a difference. Amy stood up, signaling that this conversation was nearly over. But that's not my problem anymore. What do you want? Marcus's voice cracked with defeat. What will it take to make this stop? Amy walked to the window and looked out at the neighborhood where she'd built what she thought was a life with this man. Children were playing in the park across the street. Couples were walking their dogs. The mailman was making his rounds. Normal life continued around them while her world restructured itself completely. I want you out of this house by tonight. I want you to sign the divorce papers without contest. I want you to agree to the custody arrangement my lawyer proposed. And I want you to stay away from Tyler until you can figure out how to be honest with him about what you've done. Amy, please, we can go to counseling. We can work this out. I made a mistake, but people make mistakes. Marriages survive affairs all the time. Amy turned back to face him, and Marcus must have seen something in her expression that made him shrink back against the couch cushions. This wasn't a mistake, Marcus. This was a choice. A series of choices made over months, while you looked me in the eye and lied. While you let our son deliver messages between you and your mistress. While you suggested I needed therapy for being stressed about the very behavior you were causing. I never meant for it to go this far. You meant every bit of it. You just didn't mean to get caught. Amy walked to the front door and opened it. Get out of my house. Marcus stood slowly, looking around the living room as if seeing it for the last time. This is my house too. I have rights. Not anymore. The mortgage is in my name, paid from my income. Your name was only added to the deed as a marital courtesy, which my lawyer assures me can be rectified quickly given the circumstances of our separation. Marcus stared at her as if she'd grown a second head. You planned this. You've been planning this. I got educated about my options. Yes, something I should have done years ago instead of trusting that my husband and best friend weren't systematically betraying me. Marcus walked toward the door, then stopped. What about Claire? What happens to her? The question revealed so much about his priorities that Amy almost laughed. Even now, with his marriage in ruins, and his life falling apart, he was worried about his affair partner. Claire is Kevin's problem now, though I suspect Kevin is handling things very differently than I am. The implication hit Marcus like a physical blow. You told Kevin. Kevin deserved to know the truth about his wife, just like I deserved to know the truth about my husband. Marcus's face cycled through several emotions before settling on rage. You vindictive bitch. You've destroyed everything. No, Marcus, you destroyed everything. I just stopped pretending it wasn't destroyed. After Marcus left, taking only a suitcase of clothes and his wounded pride, Amy called Tyler at his cousin's house. Hey Mom, everything okay? Marcus called me freaking out about some misunderstanding with lawyers. Amy closed her eyes, gathering strength for the hardest conversation she'd ever have to have with her son. Tyler, I need you to come home. We need to talk about some changes in our family. 2 hours later, Amy sat across from her 15-year-old son in their living room, watching him process the news that his father had been having an affair and their marriage was ending. Tyler's initial disbelief gave way to confusion, then anger, then a mature sadness that broke Amy's heart. I knew something was wrong, Tyler said quietly. Dad's been acting weird for months, and Claire was always calling when you weren't home asking where he was, when he'd be back. I thought it was about neighborhood stuff, but it felt strange. I'm sorry you're caught in the middle of this, honey. None of this is your fault, and both your father and I love you very much. If he loved me, he wouldn't have done this to our family. The simple wisdom of a teenager cut through all the adult complications and excuses. Tyler was right. People who truly loved their families didn't systematically destroy them for momentary pleasure. Your father made some very bad choices, Amy said carefully, but that doesn't mean he doesn't love you. People can love someone and still hurt them terribly. Are you going to be okay? Tyler asked, studying his mother's face with concern that was far too mature for his age. Yes, honey. I'm going to be better than okay. We both are. That evening, Helen appeared at Amy's door with a bottle of wine and takeout from the Italian restaurant where Amy and Marcus had had their first date. Symbolic closure, Helen explained, setting the food on Amy's kitchen table. From now on, that place will have better memory. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, processing the day's events. Finally, Helen spoke. How are you feeling? Amy considered the question seriously. Relieved, sad, angry, grateful, all at the same time. That's normal. Betrayal trauma is complex. You're grieving the loss of the life you thought you had while simultaneously celebrating your escape from a lie. What happened with Claire and Kevin? Helen's expression darkened. Kevin handled things very differently than you did. When he confronted Claire with the evidence, she tried to gaslight him, told him he was being manipulated by jealous neighbors. So he hired the private investigator I recommended to dig deeper into her past. And Phoenix was just the beginning. Patricia found evidence of similar patterns in 3 other cities. Claire Thompson has been preying on married couples for over a decade, always targeting the wife first, always moving on when the situation becomes untenable. Amy felt sick. How many families has she destroyed? At least 6 that we can document. Always the same pattern: befriend the wife, study the marriage, identify weaknesses, seduce the husband, manipulate both parties until the marriage implodes, then move on to the next target. She's a predator, a very sophisticated one. She has multiple identities, changes her name slightly in each city, creates entirely new histories for herself. The woman Kevin married doesn't really exist. Amy thought about all the conversations she'd had with Claire over the years, all the personal information she'd shared, all the vulnerabilities she'd exposed. She was studying me, learning how to destroy my marriage from the inside. Exactly. And she's very good at it, because she takes time to genuinely understand her targets first. The friendship feels real because she invests real effort into it, even though her motives are predatory. What will happen to her now? Helen's smile was grim. Kevin is pressing charges for identity fraud and financial abuse. Patricia found evidence that Claire has been systematically draining his accounts to fund her affairs. Plus, with the documentation we've provided, Linda from Phoenix is considering reopening her case. Good. Amy surprised herself with the vehemence in her voice. She needs to face consequences for what she's done to people. She will, but more importantly, you're free of both of them, and you have the financial security to rebuild your life however you want. Amy looked around her kitchen, at the home she'd fought to keep, at the life she was now free to redesign. I keep expecting to feel devastated. I should be heartbroken, shouldn't I? Instead, I feel powerful. You feel powerful because you are powerful. You took control of a situation where you were being controlled. You exposed lies that were designed to destroy you. You protected your son and helped another innocent person in the process. That's not something a powerless person does. I couldn't have done it without you. Helen reached across the table and squeezed Amy's hand. You could have. You just needed someone to remind you of your own strength. They spent the rest of the evening planning Amy's future. With the divorce settlement Helen's lawyer had negotiated, Amy would retain the house, receive substantial alimony, and have primary custody of Tyler. Marcus's construction business, built partially on credit lines secured by their marriage, would be liquidated to pay his debts and ensure Amy's financial security. He's going to lose everything, Amy observed without sadness. He chose to risk everything for someone who never cared about him. Actions have consequences. What about Claire? Claire will move on to the next city, the next identity, the next set of victims, unless we stop her. Amy looked up sharply. What do you mean? Helen opened her laptop and pulled up a website she'd been building. I've been documenting everything. Patricia helped me create a database of Claire's known identities, her patterns, her methods. Other victims have started coming forward with their story. The website was called Predatory Friends, and it contained detailed information about Claire's history, photos from multiple cities, and testimonials from women whose lives she'd destroyed. Linda from Phoenix found us through social media, Helen continued. She's been trying to warn people about Claire for years, but one person's story sounds like personal vendetta. Multiple victims with documented evidence sounds like a public safety issue. Amy stared at the website, reading stories that mirrored her own experience with chilling accuracy. This could prevent her from doing this to other families. That's the idea.
Predators like Claire rely on their victims feeling isolated and ashamed. They count on people not talking to each other, not comparing notes. When we shine light on their methods, they lose their power. Won't she just change her approach? Probably, but it will be harder, and other potential victims will have resources to recognize the warning signs. Amy thought about Tyler, about Kevin, about all the children and spouses who might be spared the trauma she'd experienced if Claire's pattern was disrupted. I want to be part of this, Amy said. I want to help other people recognize what's happening before it's too late. Helen smiled, and Amy recognized the expression of someone whose student had surpassed expectations. I was hoping you'd say that. Over the next few days, Amy's new life began to take shape. Marcus moved in with a coworker, apparently having discovered that Claire was less enthusiastic about their relationship now that it required actual commitment rather than sneaking around. Tyler adjusted to the new dynamic with the resilience of youth, though Amy made sure he started counseling to process the family upheaval. Claire, meanwhile, had disappeared entirely. Kevin came home from work 3 days after their confrontation to find their house emptied of everything valuable and a note claiming she'd been called away for a family emergency. Her phone was disconnected, her social media accounts deleted, and several of Kevin's credit cards had been maxed out on cash advances. "She's done this before," Kevin told Amy when he came to return some things Claire had borrowed over the year. "The investigator says it's her standard exit strategy when a situation becomes unsustainable." "Are you going to be okay?" Amy asked, looking at this man whose life had been as thoroughly destroyed as her own. Eventually, "It's strange, learning that the person you've been married to for 3 years doesn't actually exist. But in some ways, it's a relief. I spent months wondering what was wrong with me, why my wife seemed so distant and dissatisfied. Turns out nothing was wrong with me. She was just never really my wife to begin with." Amy understood exactly what he meant. The relief of knowing that the problems in their marriages hadn't been their fault, that they'd been fighting an unwinnable battle against deliberate sabotage, was oddly freeing. "Have you heard from Marcus?" Kevin asked. He's been calling Tyler, trying to explain his side of the story. Tyler listens politely and then changes the subject. "I think Marcus is beginning to understand that actions have consequences even with people who love you." "What will you tell Tyler about why his father did this?" Amy had been wrestling with that question for days. The truth, in age-appropriate ways, that his father made choices that hurt people he claimed to love, that those choices had consequences, that love without integrity isn't really love at all. Kevin nodded slowly. "That's probably the best any of us can do." 2 weeks after the confrontation, Amy received a call from Patricia, the private investigator. "We found her," Patricia said without preamble. "Claire's in Portland now, going by Claire Morrison again. She's joined a yoga studio and a book club, and she's already identified her next target." "How can you tell so quickly?" "Because we know her pattern now. She always chooses the same type of victim: successful woman, stable marriage with minor problems, husband who's feeling underappreciated. The woman she's befriending fits the profile perfectly." Amy felt a surge of protective anger for this unknown woman whose life was about to be systematically destroyed. "Can we warn her?" "That's tricky legally. We can't make direct contact without risking harassment charge, but we can make information available in ways that concerned citizens might stumble across." "What does that mean?" "It means your website is about to get some strategic social media promotion in Portland area community groups." Amy smiled grimly. If Claire wanted to play games, she was about to discover that her victims had learned to play back. 3 days later, Amy's phone rang with a call from a Portland area code. "Is this Amy Rodriguez?" "The woman who wrote about Claire Thompson on the Predatory Friends website." "Yes, this is Amy. My name is Sarah Chen. I think Claire is targeting my family." Amy spent an hour on the phone with Sarah, listening to a story that was depressingly familiar. Claire had joined Sarah's book club 2 months ago, had quickly become Sarah's closest friend in the group, and had recently started asking detailed questions about Sarah's marriage while offering subtle criticisms of her husband's behavior. "She suggested I need more excitement in my life," Sarah said. "She keeps talking about how marriage shouldn't feel like a routine, how I deserve passion, but when she says it, it makes me feel guilty for being happy with my stable life." "That's exactly how she works." Amy confirmed. "She makes you doubt what you have so you'll be more vulnerable to losing it. The weird thing is, my husband mentioned that she's been calling him too, asking about neighborhood committees and community events. But we don't have any community events planned." Amy's blood ran cold. "Sarah, you need to understand something. Claire isn't just trying to undermine your marriage through you. She's already started seducing your husband." The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long that Amy wondered if the call had been dropped. "Sarah, are you there?" "I'm here. I need to think about what you're telling me. I know this is overwhelming, but you have an advantage I didn't have. You know what she's doing before it's too late to stop it. What do you suggest I do?" Amy looked out her kitchen window at Helen, who was pruning her roses with the same methodical precision she brought to exposing predators. "You fight back," Amy said. And you don't fight alone. 6 months after her world had imploded, Amy stood in her kitchen making breakfast for Tyler, marveling at how different everything felt. The same granite countertops, the same morning sunlight streaming through the windows, but the oppressive weight of deception no longer pressed down on her shoulders. She could breathe again. Tyler appeared in the doorway, already dressed for school and carrying his basketball gear. At 16 now, he'd grown 3 inches since the divorce, and had developed a maturity that sometimes made Amy's heart ache. Children shouldn't have to grow up so fast, but Tyler had handled the family upheaval with a grace that made her proud and sad in equal measure. "Dad called again last night," Tyler said, accepting the plate of eggs and toast Amy handed him. "He wants to take me to dinner this weekend." Amy kept her expression neutral, though her stomach still tightened whenever Marcus tried to reinsert himself into their lives. "What did you tell him?" "That I'd think about it." Tyler sat at the kitchen table, the same spot where Amy had eaten breakfast with Marcus for 10 years, where she'd discovered his affair, where her life had changed forever. "He keeps saying he wants to explain everything, but I'm not sure I want to hear his explanations." Amy sat across from her son, studying his face. Tyler had Marcus's eyes and chin, but his expression held a wisdom that his father had never possessed. "You don't owe him anything, hon. Not your time, not your forgiveness, not your understanding. If you want to see him, that's your choice. If you don't, that's also your choice." He says Claire was manipulating him, that he was a victim too. The familiar anger flared in Amy's chest, but she kept her voice steady. "What do you think about that?" Tyler was quiet for a moment, considering his words with the same careful deliberation that had become his trademark since the divorce. "I think adults make choices, and I think when you hurt people you claim to love, you don't get to blame someone else for your choices." Amy felt a surge of pride mixed with sadness. Her son understood accountability better than his father ever had. He also said Claire disappeared completely. No forwarding address, no contact information. Like she just vanished. Amy knew better. Claire hadn't vanished. She'd simply moved on to her next identity, her next set of victims. But thanks to the network Amy and Helen had built, Claire's ability to operate undetected was becoming increasingly limited. "Some people run when they're faced with consequences," Amy said. "That tells you everything you need to know about their character." After Tyler left for school, Amy settled at her laptop to review the latest reports from the women who had reached out through the Predatory Friends website. In the 6 months since they'd launched it, 17 women had contacted them with stories about Claire, and 12 more had shared experiences with similar predators, who used the same manipulation tactics. Sarah Chen in Portland had been their first success story. Armed with knowledge about Claire's methods, Sarah had been able to recognize the manipulation attempts and protect her marriage. She'd confronted Claire directly, and within a week, Claire had moved on to a different city rather than risk exposure. But their most significant breakthrough had come 3 months ago, when Linda Morrison from Phoenix reached out with news that would change everything. Amy's phone rang, interrupting her review of the latest case files. The caller ID showed Linda Morrison, and Amy smiled as she answered. "Linda, good morning. Please tell me you have good news." "Better than good." Linda's voice carried an excitement Amy hadn't heard before. "The district attorney's office just called. They're filing charges." Amy felt her heart race. For months they'd been building a case against Claire for identity fraud, financial abuse, and what one prosecutor had termed criminal predatory manipulation. But proving criminal intent in emotional manipulation cases was notoriously difficult. What changed? "Remember Maria Santos in San Diego, the woman who contacted us last month?" Amy did remember. Maria's story had been particularly devastating. Claire had targeted her family when Maria was going through cancer treatment, manipulating both Maria and her husband during their most vulnerable time before disappearing with their emergency medical fund. "Maria went to the FBI," Linda continued. "She found out that using false identities to cross state lines for the purpose of fraud is a federal crime. When the FBI started investigating, they found evidence connecting Claire to similar schemes in 8 different states." Amy sank into her kitchen chair, overwhelmed by the implication. 8 states? At least 8. They think there may be more. Claire Thompson, Claire Morrison, Claire Williams, Claire Matthews. She's been doing this for over 15 years, Amy. Dozens of families destroyed, hundreds of thousands of dollars stolen, lives completely devastated. Amy thought about Tyler, about Kevin, about all the children who had watched their families implode because of one woman's greed and manipulation. Do they know where she is now? Seattle. She's calling herself Claire Davidson, and she's already started working on her next target. But this time, local law enforcement is watching her. They're building evidence for when the FBI is ready to make arrests. After ending the call with Linda, Amy sat in her kitchen processing the magnitude of what they'd uncovered. What had started as one woman's desire for justice had exposed a sophisticated criminal operation that had been destroying families across the country for over a decade. Her phone buzzed with a text from Helen. "Coffee this morning. I have news about the Thompson investigation." An hour later, Amy sat across from Helen, at their usual table in the Daily Grind, the same coffee shop where Claire had manipulated her just months ago. Helen looked energized in a way Amy hadn't seen since they'd first started working together. "The FBI contacted me this morning," Helen said without preamble. "They want me to consult on the case." Amy raised her eyebrows. "Consult? Apparently my documentation methods and the legal framework I used to preserve evidence are exactly what they need to build prosecutable cases against predators like Claire. They're asking me to help develop protocols for other law enforcement agents." Amy felt a surge of pride for her unlikely ally. "Helen, that's incredible. You could help protect thousands of families." "We could help protect them," Helen corrected. "They want both of us involved. Your experience as a recent victim, and your insights into modern manipulation tactics, combined with my legal background, could be valuable for training programs." Amy stared at Helen, processing the implications. "They want us to work with law enforcement. More than that, they want us to help them understand how predators like Claire operate in the digital age, how they use social media and online communities to identify and groom their targets. Your marketing background gives you insights into behavioral psychology that most law enforcement officers don't have." Amy thought about all the skills she'd developed in her career, all the knowledge about human psychology and digital manipulation that she'd used to create successful advertising campaigns. She'd never considered how those same skills could be used to expose predators. "What would we be doing specifically?" Helen opened her laptop and showed Amy a presentation she'd been developing. "Training seminars for law enforcement on recognizing organized emotional manipulation, educational programs for community groups about the warning signs of predatory friendship, consultation on cases involving sophisticated psychological abuse." Amy scrolled through Helen's presentation, impressed by the thoroughness of her research and the clarity of her recommendations. "You've been planning this for a while." "I've been hoping for this opportunity my whole career," Helen admitted. 30 years on the family court bench taught me that by the time cases reach the legal system, the damage is usually irreversible. Prevention is so much more powerful than prosecution. "What about our current cases? The women who are still reaching out through the website? We'll continue that work, but with official support now. The FBI is providing resources to help us respond more quickly and effectively to new reports." Amy thought about Sarah Chen, about Maria Santos, about all the women who had found the courage to reach out because they knew someone would believe them and help them fight back. "I'm in," Amy said, "but I have one condition." "What's that?" "Tyler comes first. If this work ever interferes with his well-being or our family's stability, I step back." Helen nodded approvingly. "Any organization that would ask you to sacrifice your son's welfare isn't worth working with. The FBI understands that protecting families is the whole point of this work." That evening, Amy sat down with Tyler to explain the new developments. She'd learned to be transparent with him about age-appropriate aspects of the case, and his insights often surprised her with their clarity. "So Claire was basically a professional criminal," Tyler said when Amy finished explaining about the federal investigation. "That's exactly what she was, just very sophisticated about it. And now you're going to help catch other people like her." "I'm going to help educate people about how to recognize them, before they can do damage. Tyler was quiet for a moment, processing the information with his characteristic thoughtfulness. Does this mean Dad was just another victim? Emmy had been dreading this question, knowing Tyler was trying to reconcile his anger at his father with his understanding of Claire's manipulative skills. Your father was targeted by someone who was very skilled at manipulation, Emmy said carefully, but he still made choices. Claire didn't force him to lie to us, to steal from our savings, to let you carry messages between them. Those were his decisions, so he's a victim and responsible at the same time. People can be both, honey. Being manipulated doesn't excuse the choices you make or the people you hurt. Your father is responsible for his actions, even if someone else influenced them. Tyler nodded slowly. That makes sense. It's like if someone dared me to cheat on a test. They might have pressured me, but I'd still be the one who chose to cheat. Emmy marveled again at her son's ability to cut through adult complexities to reach simple truths. Are you okay with me doing this work? Emmy asked. It means some travel, some evening meetings, some difficult conversation. Mom, you've been happier these past few months than I've seen you in years. If helping other people makes you feel good about yourself, then I'm happy for you. The simple wisdom of his support brought tears to Amy's eyes. Tyler had lost the family structure he'd grown up with, but he'd gained something too, a mother who was no longer diminished by constant manipulation and self-doubt. 2 weeks later, Amy found herself in an FBI conference room in Los Angeles, presenting to a group of federal agents about the psychology of emotional predators. She'd never imagined standing in front of law enforcement officers, but the experience felt surprisingly natural. The key to understanding predators like Claire Thompson, Amy explained, clicking through slides Helen had helped her prepare, is recognizing that they're not impulsive or emotional, they're strategic. Every friendship they form, every confidence they gain, every piece of advice they give is calculated to serve their ultimate goal. Agent Martinez, the lead investigator on the Claire Thompson case, raised her hand. What makes someone vulnerable to this type of manipulation? Amy thought about her own experience, about Sarah Chen, about all the women who had trusted the wrong person at the wrong time. Normal human traits, Amy replied. Kindness, trust, the desire to be a good friend. Predators like Claire target people who are fundamentally decent, because decent people assume others are decent too. They exploit our best qualities against us. How can potential victims protect themselves without becoming paranoid or antisocial? It was a question Amy had wrestled with personally. How do you maintain the ability to trust without becoming naive? Education and awareness, Amy said. When you know the warning signs, you can still be open to genuine friendship, while being alert to manipulation tactics. It's like knowing how to spot a scam email. You don't stop using email, but you learn to recognize suspicious patterns. After the presentation, Agent Martinez approached Amy privately. We arrested Claire Thompson this morning in Seattle, she said quietly. Amy felt her knees weaken with relief. Really? Really? We have enough evidence to charge her with federal fraud, identity theft, and organized criminal activity. She's not going to manipulate any more family. Amy thought about Tyler, about Kevin, about all the families Claire had destroyed over 15 years of criminal activity. What happens now? Now she faces justice, and the protocols you and Helen are helping us develop will help us catch the next predator before they cause this much damage. Amy drove home from Los Angeles, feeling something she hadn't experienced in months. Complete peace. Claire Thompson was finally facing consequences for her actions. The families she'd destroyed were getting justice, and Amy had found a way to transform her own trauma into protection for others. But her sense of resolution was tested 2 days later when Tyler came home from school with unexpected news. Dad was at basketball practice today, Tyler said, dropping his gear by the front door. He wants to talk to you. Amy felt her stomach clench. She hadn't spoken directly to Marcus since their divorce was finalized, and she had no desire to start now. What did you tell him? That he should call you if he wanted to talk to you, but that I wasn't going to be his messenger. Amy smiled at Tyler's boundary-setting skills. Good for you. Did he say what he wanted? He said he had some things he needed to tell you about Claire, things he found out after she disappeared. Amy's curiosity warred with her reluctance to engage with Marcus. Part of her wanted to know what he'd discovered, but part of her was tired of giving him any space in her mental energy. "I'll think about it," she told Tyler, but that evening, as Amy was preparing dinner, Marcus called. "Amy, I know you don't want to talk to me, but there are things you need to know, things about Claire that even you might not have figured out." Against her better judgment, Amy found herself curious. "What things? Can we meet for coffee, somewhere public? I have documents, evidence of things she was planning that go beyond what she did to us." Amy hesitated. She'd worked hard to rebuild her life without Marcus in it, and she had no desire to reopen old wounds. But if he had information that could help other victims or strengthen the federal case against Claire, she owed it to those families to listen.
"1 hour," she said finally, "the daily grind. Tomorrow at 10. "Thank you, Amy. I know I don't deserve." "You're right," Amy interrupted. "You don't. This isn't about what you deserve. It's about making sure Claire can never hurt anyone else." The next morning, Amy sat in the daily grind waiting for Marcus with emotions she couldn't quite identify. Anxiety, certainly. Curiosity about what he'd discovered, but also something else. Pity. In the months since their divorce, Marcus had lost everything. His marriage, his home, his relationship with Tyler, his financial security, and ultimately Claire herself when she'd disappeared without a trace. Marcus arrived looking older than his 42 years, his confidence replaced by a nervous energy that made Amy remember why she'd fallen for him in the first place. He'd been vulnerable then too, recently divorced and struggling to rebuild his life. Amy realized with sudden clarity that Claire had probably targeted Marcus for the same reasons she'd targeted Amy. He was emotionally available and desperate for validation. "Thank you for meeting me," Marcus said, sliding into the seat across from her. "I wasn't sure you would. I'm here for the other families Claire might hurt, not for you," Amy said bluntly. "What did you find?" Marcus opened a folder and spread several documents across the table. Amy recognized bank statements, credit card records, and what appeared to be legal documents. "After Claire disappeared, I started going through everything, trying to figure out how much money she'd stolen from me, but I found more than financial theft." Marcus pointed to a series of bank transfers. She was systematically moving money from multiple accounts, not just mine and Kevin's, but accounts I'd never seen before. Amy studied the documents. Whose accounts? Other victims, women in other cities who had trusted her with financial information, or men she'd convinced to give her access to their resources. She was running a sophisticated financial operation. Amy felt sick looking at the amounts involved. Tens of thousands of dollars moved between accounts in different states, all flowing toward accounts controlled by Claire under her various identities. "There's more," Marcus continued, pulling out a notebook. "I found this in a storage unit she'd rented under another name. It's like a playbook for targeting and manipulating people." Amy opened the notebook and felt her blood freeze. Page after page of detailed notes about manipulation tactics, psychological vulnerabilities, and strategic timelines for destroying relationships. It read like a manual for emotional predators. She had profiles on dozens of potential targets, Marcus said quietly, including detailed notes about their marriages, their finances, their psychological weak points. "Amy, we weren't random victims, we were research subjects." Amy flipped through pages of notes about families she didn't recognize, seeing her own marriage analyzed with clinical detachment. Claire had noted Amy's work stress, Marcus's need for validation, Tyler's sports schedule, even their financial habits and relationship patterns. "She was studying us," Amy whispered, "for months before she made her move. She joined your book club, befriended the other wives, learned about everyone's lives. Then she selected the targets with the most promising combinations of assets and vulnerability." Amy looked up at Marcus, seeing something in his expression she'd never seen before. Genuine remorse mixed with horrified understanding of how completely they'd been manipulated. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because the FBI needs to see it. Because other families need to understand how sophisticated these predators can be. And because—" Marcus stopped, struggling with words. "Because what?" "Because I need you to know that I understand now what I was part of, what I helped her do to you, to Tyler, to Kevin. I thought I was having an affair. I didn't realize I was participating in organized crime." Amy stared at her ex-husband, processing the implications of what he was telling her.
Claire hadn't just been a manipulative woman having affairs. She'd been running a complex criminal operation that used emotional manipulation as a cover for systematic financial theft. The storage unit, Amy said. Does the FBI know about it? Not yet. I called you first because I thought you should be the one to give them the information. You're the one working with them, the one who built the case against her. This should be your victory. Amy looked at the evidence spread across the coffee shop table, evidence that would likely ensure Claire spent decades in federal prison, but she didn't feel victorious. She felt hollow, drained by the realization of how completely she'd been deceived. This doesn't change anything between us, Marcus. This doesn't undo the choices you made, or the damage you caused. I know, Marcus said quietly. I'm not asking for forgiveness, or trying to excuse what I did. I'm just trying to do one thing right after doing so many things wrong. Amy gathered the documents and stood up. I'll make sure the FBI gets this information. But Marcus, after today, I don't want any contact between us unless it's absolutely necessary for Tyler's welfare. I understand. Amy walked away from Marcus and out of the daily grind, carrying evidence that would help ensure justice for dozens of families, while feeling the strange emptiness that comes with absolute closure. Her marriage was truly over, not just legally, but emotionally. Marcus would always be Tyler's father, but he would never again be part of Amy's life. But as she drove to the FBI field office to deliver the evidence, Amy realized something important had shifted inside her. For months, she'd carried anger and hurt like stones in her chest. Now looking at the clear evidence of how systematically she'd been targeted and manipulated, she felt something else entirely: relief. She hadn't been stupid or naive or inadequate. She'd been the victim of a sophisticated criminal who had spent months studying her vulnerabilities and exploiting them with professional precision. Understanding the true scope of Claire's operation didn't excuse Marcus's choices, but it helped Amy forgive herself for trusting the wrong people. That evening, Amy sat with Tyler at their kitchen table, helping him with his algebra homework while she processed everything she'd learned. You're different tonight, Tyler observed, looking up from his math problems, calmer somehow. I found out some things today that helped me understand what really happened to our family, Amy said. It doesn't change anything, but it helps me make sense of it. Good sense or bad sense? Honest sense, which is always better than confusion, even when the truth is painful. Tyler nodded with the wisdom of someone who had learned too young that honesty, however difficult, was preferable to comfortable lies. Are you going to keep doing this work, helping other families? Amy looked around their kitchen, at the life she'd rebuilt from the ashes of betrayal, at the son who had grown stronger through adversity, at the future full of possibilities she'd never expected. Yes, she said, I think I'm just getting started. 2 years had passed since Amy Rodriguez first discovered that text message meant for Claire Thompson, and now she stood before a federal courthouse in Denver, watching news crews set up their equipment for what would be the final chapter in Claire's story. The predator who had destroyed so many families was about to learn the consequences of 15 years of calculated cruelty. Amy adjusted her navy blazer, the same one she'd worn to her first FBI consultation, and checked her phone for messages from Tyler. Her son, now 18 and preparing for college, had offered to skip school to be there for the verdict, but Amy had insisted he focus on his upcoming final exams. Some battles were meant to be fought alone. Helen Martinez appeared at Amy's side, her silver hair perfectly styled despite the early morning hour. At 75, Helen moved with the same determined precision that had made her a formidable family court judge and an even more formidable advocate for justice. Ready for Helen asked, studying Amy's face with the careful attention of someone who had guided her through the most difficult period of her life. I've been ready for 2 years, Amy replied, watching Claire's defense attorney hurry up the courthouse steps, with an expression of barely concealed The evidence against Claire had been overwhelming. The notebook Marcus had discovered in the storage unit had contained detailed profiles of 43 families across 12 states. Financial records showed she had stolen over $800,000 through various schemes involving fraudulent identities and manipulated relationships. Most damning of all, they had found video recordings Claire had made of herself, celebrating successful manipulations and planning future targets with the cold calculation of a predator who viewed human suffering as a professional achievement. Any word from the other family? Amy asked, as they walked toward the courthouse entrance. Linda's flight landed an hour ago. Maria's driving up from Albuquerque. Sarah Chen couldn't make it from Portland, but she sent a statement for the victim impact portion. Helen paused at the security checkpoint. 17 families will be represented here today, Amy. 17 families who found the courage to come forward because you showed them it was possible to fight back. Amy thought about those families as they passed through security and made their way to the courtroom. The Andersons from Phoenix, whose retirement savings Claire had stolen while destroying their 30-year marriage. The Williams family from Austin, where Claire had manipulated both parents during their daughter's cancer treatment. The Nakamuras from San Francisco, who had lost their small business when Claire convinced the husband to invest their operating capital in a scheme that existed only to fund her lifestyle. Each story had followed the same devastating pattern: befriend the wife, study the family dynamics, seduce the husband, steal whatever was valuable, then disappear when the situation became unsustainable. Claire had refined her methods over 15 years until she could destroy a family in less than 6 months, while making it appear as though their problems were natural relationship failure. The courtroom was already filling when Amy and Helen took their seats in the section reserved for victims and their families. Amy recognized several faces from the support group they had helped establish, women who had found strength in sharing their experiences and rebuilding their lives together. Linda Morrison sat 2 rows ahead, her gray hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. At 62, Linda had spent 7 years trying to convince law enforcement that Claire was a professional predator rather than simply an opportunistic affair partner. The validation of this trial meant more to Linda than anyone else in the room. Maria Santos entered with her teenage daughter, both of them wearing matching silver crosses that caught the courtroom's fluorescent lighting. Maria's family had been targeted during her cancer treatment, when Claire had volunteered to help with household tasks, while systematically seducing Maria's husband and draining their medical emergency fund. The betrayal had been so complete that Maria's daughter had stopped speaking to her father entirely, unable to forgive him for choosing Claire over her sick mother. Kevin Thompson sat alone near the back of the courtroom, looking older than his 45 years. In the 2 years since Claire's arrest, Kevin had struggled to rebuild his life while processing the reality that his 3-year marriage had been nothing more than an elaborate con game. He'd sold his house to pay the legal fees associated with recovering the money Claire had stolen, and now lived in a small apartment while working to rebuild his credit and his sense of self-worth. At exactly 9 o'clock, the bailiff called the court to order and Judge Patricia Hoffman entered. Amy had researched Judge Hoffman extensively and felt encouraged by her reputation for harsh sentences in cases involving financial crimes against vulnerable populations. Claire Thompson entered the courtroom in handcuffs and an orange jumpsuit, her blonde hair pulled back in a simple ponytail that made her look younger than her 41 years. Amy studied the woman who had systematically destroyed her marriage, looking for some sign of remorse or acknowledgement of the devastation she had caused. Claire's expression was blank, almost bored, as if this were simply another inconvenience, rather than the culmination of a federal investigation that had taken 2 years to complete. Even now, facing potentially decades in prison, Claire showed no emotion beyond mild annoyance at the proceeding. The defendant will rise for sentencing, Judge Hoffman announced, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to delivering life-changing news. Claire stood with her attorney, a young man who had argued unsuccessfully that his client was merely a woman with poor judgment in relationships, rather than a sophisticated criminal. The jury had deliberated for less than 3 hours before finding Claire guilty on all counts: federal fraud, identity theft, interstate criminal conspiracy and organized financial abuse. Claire Thompson, also known as Claire Morrison, Claire Williams, Claire Matthews and Claire David. Judge Hoffman began, reading from the sentencing document. You have been found guilty of systematically targeting and destroying families for personal financial gain over a period of 15 years. Amy felt her heart rate increase as the judge continued recounting the scope of Claire's crime. 43 documented victims, estimated damages exceeding $1 million, psychological trauma that had led to at least 6 documented suicide attempts among her victims' family members. The court has reviewed extensive victim impact statements, Judge Hoffman continued, and it is clear that your actions have caused devastating and lasting harm to dozens of innocent people. Children have lost their families, spouses have lost their life savings, and entire communities have been disrupted by your calculated deceptions. Claire remained expressionless, staring straight ahead, as if the judge were discussing someone else's crime. However, what disturbs this court most profoundly is not just the scope of your crimes, but the complete absence of any acknowledgement of wrongdoing or expression of remorse. Your psychological evaluation indicates a level of callousness and manipulation that presents an ongoing danger to society. Amy glanced around the courtroom and saw the same tension in every face. This was the moment they had all been waiting for, the culmination of years of investigation and legal proceedings. On the charge of federal fraud, this court sentences you to 12 years in federal prison. On the charge of identity theft, an additional 8 years. On the charge of interstate criminal conspiracy, an additional 10 years. On the charge of organized financial abuse, an additional 15 years. Amy did quick math in her head and felt a surge of satisfaction. 45 years in federal prison meant Claire would be 86 years old before she was eligible for parole. These sentences will run consecutively, not concurrently, Judge Hoffman continued, and Amy heard audible gasps throughout the courtroom. Additionally, you are ordered to pay restitution in the amount of $1.2 million to your victims, and you are permanently banned from using social media or any form of electronic communication beyond basic telephone service upon your eventual release. Claire's lawyer leaned over to whisper something in her ear, and for the first time Amy saw a flicker of emotion cross Claire's face. Not remorse or regret, but anger. Even now, facing decades in prison, Claire was angry at being held accountable rather than sorry for the damage she had caused. "Do you have anything to say before this court, Miss Thompson?" Judge Hoffman asked. Claire looked up for the first time since entering the courtroom, her eyes scanning the assembled victims and their family. When her gaze found Amy, there was a moment of recognition followed by something that looked almost like respect. "I have nothing to say to this court," Claire said, her voice clear and steady, "except that people choose to trust me. I never forced anyone to do anything they didn't want to do." The statement was so breathtaking in its lack of accountability that several people in the courtroom audibly gasped. After everything she had done, all the evidence of manipulation and calculation, Claire was still claiming that her victims were responsible for their own destruction. "The defendant is remanded to federal custody," Judge Hoffman said, her voice cold with disgust. "Court is adjourned." As Claire was led away in handcuffs, Amy felt a complex mix of emotions: relief that justice had finally been served, satisfaction that Claire would spend the rest of her productive years in prison, but also a strange emptiness, as if the conclusion of this chapter left her wondering what came next. Outside the courthouse, Amy found herself surrounded by other victims and their families, people who had become an unexpected community bound together by shared trauma and recovery. Linda Morrison approached first, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," Linda said, embracing Amy with surprising strength. "You gave all of us a voice when we thought no one would listen." Maria Santos was next, her daughter beside her looking solemn but somehow lighter than she had in years. "My family is finally healing," Maria said. "Knowing that Claire can never hurt anyone else again gives us peace." Kevin Thompson lingered at the edge of the group, looking uncertain about whether he belonged among the other victims. Amy approached him directly. "How are you doing, Kevin?" she asked, studying his face with genuine concern. "Better," he said simply. "It helps to know that I wasn't just a fool who married the wrong woman. I was targeted by a professional criminal. That doesn't excuse my blindness, but it helps me understand it." Amy nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. Learning the true scope of Claire's operation had helped all of them forgive themselves for being deceived by someone who had spent years perfecting her manipulation techniques. "What will you do now?" Kevin asked. Amy looked around at the group of people who had found strength in each other's stories, at Helen, who was already organizing the next phase of their advocacy work, at the courthouse where justice had finally been served. "We're expanding the program," Amy said. "The FBI wants us to develop training modules for law enforcement agencies across the country. We're also working with universities to research the psychology of predatory manipulation, so future victims can be identified and protected earlier." And personally, What's next for Amy Rodriguez? Amy smiled, realizing that for the first time in years, she was excited about her future rather than just recovering from her past. Tyler starts college at UC Berkeley in the fall. I'm thinking about going back to school myself, maybe getting a degree in criminal psychology. There's a lot more work to be done protecting families from predators. That evening, Amy sat in her kitchen with Tyler, celebrating the conclusion of the trial with takeout from their favorite Thai restaurant. Tyler had grown into a young man who possessed both his father's intelligence and his mother's integrity, a combination that gave Amy hope for his future. So it's really over? Tyler asked, reviewing the news coverage on his laptop. This part is over, Amy replied. Claire Thompson will spend the rest of her life in prison, which means she can never hurt another family. But there are other predators out there using similar techniques, and there are always new victims who need support and advocacy. Tyler nodded thoughtfully. At 18, he understood nuance in ways that continued to surprise Amy. Are you going to keep doing this work for as long as people need it? Does that bother you? Mom, you found something you're passionate about that also helps people. Why would that bother me? Tyler grinned, looking younger than his years for a moment. Besides, it's pretty cool having a mom who catches professional criminals. Amy laughed, remembering the confused and devastated woman she'd been 2 years ago when she first discovered Marcus's affair. That woman could never have imagined becoming someone who consulted with federal law enforcement or spoke at national conferences about predatory manipulation. I'm proud of how you've handled all of this, Amy said seriously. I know it wasn't easy watching our family fall apart, or learning that your father had been manipulated into making such destructive choices. I'm proud of how you handled it too, Tyler replied. A lot of people would have just gotten divorced and tried to move on. You turned your worst experience into something that protects other people. That's pretty amazing. After Tyler went to bed, Amy walked through her house, looking at the life she had rebuilt from the ashes of betrayal. The same kitchen where she had discovered Marcus's affair now felt like the command center for work that gave her life meaning. The living room where she had confronted the evidence of Claire's manipulation was now where she met with other victims and planned advocacy strategy. Her phone rang, and Amy smiled when she saw Helen's name on the caller ID. How does it feel? Helen asked without preamble. Surreal, Amy admitted. I keep expecting to feel more triumphant. Instead, I just feel grateful. Grateful for what? Amy considered the question seriously. Grateful that Tyler and I survived intact. Grateful that we were able to help other families. Grateful that Marcus showed me who he really was before I wasted more years of my life on him. Even grateful for Claire, in a strange way. Grateful for Claire. Helen's voice carried amusement and curiosity. She destroyed the life I thought I wanted, but she forced me to build the life I actually needed. I would never have discovered how strong I was if I hadn't been tested by her betrayal. I would never have found work that mattered to me if I hadn't experienced firsthand how devastating predatory manipulation can be. You've come a long way from the woman who stood crying in my garden 2 years ago. Amy smiled, remembering that moment when Helen had first offered to help her seek justice rather than just accept her losses. I had a good teacher. You had good instincts. I just helped you trust them. After ending the call with Helen, Amy poured herself a glass of wine and sat on her back patio, looking up at the stars barely visible through the suburban light pollution. Somewhere in California, Marcus was living in a small apartment, working construction jobs, and trying to rebuild his life while processing the reality that he had been a pawn in someone else's criminal scheme. Amy felt no satisfaction in his struggles, but no sympathy either. He had made choices that hurt people he claimed to love, and consequences were simply the price of those choices. Somewhere in a federal prison in Colorado, Claire Thompson was beginning a sentence that would likely last the rest of her life. Amy wondered if Claire would ever understand the scope of the devastation she had caused, or if she would spend her remaining years convinced that she was the victim of an unfair system, rather than the architect of dozens of family tragedies. And here in Riverside Heights, Amy Rodriguez was planning her next day, her next week, her next year with the confidence of someone who had learned that she was stronger than she had ever imagined. The woman who had once defined herself as Marcus's wife and Tyler's mother had discovered that she was also a fierce advocate, a skilled investigator, and a natural teacher, Tyler was right about one thing: it was pretty cool being someone who caught professional criminals. Amy's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Ms. Rodriguez, my name is Jennifer Walsh from Portland. I think someone is targeting my family, using the same methods you described in your presentation last month. Can you help me? Amy smiled and typed back, I'll call you in the morning. You're not alone, and you're not powerless. We'll figure this out together. She set her phone aside and looked up at the stars again, thinking about all the families who were sleeping peacefully tonight because Claire Thompson was in federal prison, and all the families who might sleep peacefully in the future because Jennifer Walsh had reached out for help before it was too late. Some stories end with dramatic confrontations or tearful reconciliations, others end with quiet satisfaction and the promise of meaningful work ahead. Amy's story had ended with justice served, lessons learned, and a future full of opportunities to protect other families from predators who viewed human trust as a resource to be exploited. She had started this journey as a victim, discovered her strength as a survivor, and found her purpose as a protector. Claire Thompson had intended to destroy Amy's life, but instead had given her the tools and motivation to build something better than she had ever imagined possible. Tomorrow would bring new cases, new victims who needed support, new opportunities to turn tragedy into triumph. But tonight, Amy Rodriguez sat in her garden under the stars, grateful for the woman she had become, and excited about the work still to be done. The girl who had once believed that love meant accepting whatever treatment she received, had grown into a woman who knew that real love required integrity, honesty, and respect. The woman who had once defined herself through her relationships with others, had learned to find value in her own accomplishments and character. And the mother who had once worried about protecting her son from the truth, had discovered that truth, however painful, was always preferable to comfortable lies. Claire Thompson had been sentenced to 45 years in federal prison, but Amy Rodriguez had been sentenced to something much better: a lifetime of knowing exactly who she was, and what she was capable of achieving. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories, right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up, just click and check them out.